the mitzvah of Binyan Beis HaMikdash, the Rambam in the beginning of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, and in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, Asay Chof. We'll read from the Lashon of the Yad HaChazak. Mitzvah Lasos Bayis LaHashem Muchan Lios Makru HaKravos Chol Gil Love Shlosh Paimim Bashana Shneimar Vasuli Mikdash. Mitzvah say to make a house for Hashem, where you do the korbanos and you celebrate there 3 times a year. Shneimar Vasuli Mikdash. The same lashon is, just slightly more expanded in mitzvah chav. U'tzvah livnos beis ha'bchira la'avoda, right? Beis ha'bchira for service. Bo ya'akrava varas eish tamid, and also the eish tamid. V'elav ti'alicha ba'aliyah l'rega v'kibbutz v'chol shana, and that's where we do aliyah l'rega. And gadav shnei yishvo omro yis'alev vasuli mikdash, and also in the minyan mitzvahs hakotzar, right? Sirio livnos beis ha'bchira shneimar vasuli mikdash. So what's obvious so far is that the Rambam derives the mitzvah saseh to build the Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaBchira from Vasuli Mikdash. It is interesting that in all the sources that we've quoted, he just mentions half a pasuk. Vasuli Mikdash, the beautiful ending of the pasuk, Vishachanti Besocham, is not mentioned. And, and I think that's a makom iyun, of why, even though you could say, well, Vasuli Mikdash is the whole point. That's the tzivui. V'shachanti b'socham is a haftacha. But od yevuar be'ezer Hashem. So the first thing I want to point out is that we have a stira. Right? The Rambam in the beginning of Hilchos Malachim, Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph, Sholosh mitzvahs nitzdavu Yisrael b'shas kisasam la'aretz. There are 3 mitzvahs that Klal Yisrael was a command to do at the time when they entered Eretz Yisrael. Limos lehem melech, shenema som telechem melech, right, to appoint a king, as the pasuk says in Parshas Shoftim, right, appoint a king. Lachrizar Malach shem ar timchei zechamok, and to wipe out the descendants of Malach, as it says timchei zechamok. V'livnos beis ha'bchira, and to build the beis ha'bchira, shenemar l'shichnai sidrashu ubas Hashem, as the pasuk says, to his place of dwelling, seek and go there. To his place of dwelling, seek and go there. What happened to the pasuk of Vasuli Mikdash, V'shachanti b'socham? That's, the Rambam had mentioned that is the chiyuv. Now, when he's bringing this chazal about the shosh v'shish nitzdavu Yisrael, he's bringing a different pasuk. What happened with the pasuk of Vasuli Mikdash? A whole different pasuk, l'shichno sidrashu. Right? So we'll be magdim a machloikis, the Rambam and the Ramban. Right? The Rambam, kayadua, wrote his Sefer HaMitzvahs, right, to attack the Binyan HaMitzvahs of the Bahag. And the Ramban wrote Hasagas to defend the Bahag. So in the Sharash Hashnei Masar, the Rambam's laying out his guidelines of what qualifies to be counted as a mitzvah. So when HaKadosh tells you to do something, do a project, and not every step of the project should be counted as its own mitzvah. Rather, the name of the project, that's the mitzvah. Not every step spelt out should be called a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. It's one mitzvah. The name of the project name is the mitzvah, and all these other steps are just all chelkei of that mitzvah. And the Rambam gives, a few examples. The example that we want, that interests us, right? Yadua sharachtu nimtza pa'im shetzor ma'aseh min ha'ma'aseh. Okay, yavo kasu var echus ha'ma'aseh hu v'yivar Hashem shezachar v'yomar al ma shehu nofel. Right? Sometimes the HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us to do something, but then after that he explains to us how to do it, right? And he defines the terms of what he meant. So when he's explaining what he told you to do, those explanations and those detailed steps of how to perform that mitzvah, those steps should not be counted as mitzvahs in their own right. Kamo, as example, Vasuli Mikdash, right? The pasuk of Vasuli Mikdash, Shezeh mitzvahs aseh achas mikol mitzvahenu bais muchan shival v'chilgu bo v'yitebo akrava bo kibbutz b'moadim. That is a mitzvah that we should have a house that's ready that we come to it and we celebrate it, and we do the hakrava in it, the sacrificial order in it, and that's where you do the aliyah regel. Then the Torah came up to explain the components and how it should be made. So all the vasisas, right, should not be counted, right, as mitzvahs in their own right. Right, and he goes on to give our examples, but what he means to say is he is clearly referring to the kalim of the Beis HaMikdash, making our own. Everything that's detailed in Parshas Truma and Tetzaveh, all the different kalim of the Mikdash are not to be counted as mitzvahs in their own right. And that is what he's referring to. It's just one mitzvah of Vasui Mikdash Shechanti B'Socham, and the Rambam most definitely echoes. This is what he means over here in the Sherish in Mitzvah Chaf. Now the V'kvar isbaru mishpei mitzvah b'chlol kol binyan beis rosh v'ta'aro u'binyan ha-mizbeach v'meseches mechuber zazu v'chein hitbar tavnis ha-menorah v'ashulchan v'mizbeach hazav u'makam hanachasam minahechol b'gmor machzuna. So Rambam says the mitzvah of Vasili Mikdash includes making the kalim and how to position them within the Beis HaMikdash. They're all nichol the mitzvah of Vasili Mikdash Shachanti B'Socham, and after you see this, it's very clear. That's also what he means in Parak Aleph of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, Halacha Daled and Hey. Right? Most definitely, more particularly Halacha Hey, that the kalim and how they're situated is all a chelik from Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Right. So the Ramban, did in his Hasogas right here, did not take issue with the Rambam on that. He more defends the Bahag on what he could be defended on, which is by the other examples that the Rambam brought of where there's multi steps to a certain project, and he defends the Bahag regarding those other cases that the Ram brings. Doesn't defend them regarding making every kli a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, but where he does krig on the Rambam Shita is in his Hasagas in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, on the mitzvahs, in Hasaga to the mitzvah of mitzvah Lamed Daled. Excuse me, not Lamed Daled. I meant the Hasaga to Lamed Gimel. So in the Hasagas, in course of the Hasaga over there, he's arguing with the Rambam in how to divide up all the mitzvahs that go into the Avodah, right, and the Mikdash-related mitzvahs. Over there, he decided to take issue with the Rambam on how many mitzvahs exactly are there regarding the Mikdash and the Avodah, and he says like this. So I admit, I'm not going to count making the shulchan and the mizbeach and the menorah mitzvahs in their own right. Right, because we have a tziv of lechem upon it. It's on the bechsher avodah azais. She lasum alto b'shulchan mitu arkain v'suralanu. Right, she. Okay, so he says like the shulchan. Right, there's a mitzvah. I'm not going to make the shulchan its own mitzvah, but where is it in the Taryag? Because there is a mitzvah asay of lechem upon him. But of course, to be mekayim that mitzvah lechem upon him, you don't put it anywhere. You put it in a shulchan that has such and such dimensions. So heavy omer that the shulchan is a hechsher mitzvah for the mitzvah of lechem upon him, which Ram also counts lechem upon him as a mitzvah. So Ramban says you put the shulchan as part of the mitzvah of lechem upon him because you can't do lechem upon him without a shulchan. And goes on the Ramban to say, v'tzivo sanu bechshara v'shir sanu shetea adlaka azus b'menor shel zav mishkov miyana kemakain. And also there's a mitzvah sasei doraisa to be madlik u'meitiv v'saneros, right? A mitzvah the Rambam counts. You cannot be madlik and be meitiv any haneros as in your leichter at home. that you light your Shabbos candles in. It's in the, this kli called the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash that has its halachas of how it's to be constructed. So asiyas ha-menorah is nichlal in the mitzvah of adlakas haneros, because you can't be mekayim that mitzvah of adlakas haneros without a menorah. Right? Ve'hine ein tashmisha kedusha. Right? V'lo huchshar bein ha'atam shekazav ba'ram shar shem chalkim michalkei ha'mikdash v'shein kelim chelak min ha'batim. Avayim shtayim mitzvahs ve'enu makva zu et zu. V'makrim b'bayis v'shein bo kelim. And then he goes on. So he says before he doesn't agree with what the Rambam did. The Rambam made the kelim, like the mizbeach and the shulchan and the menorah, right? And what goes with them. He made them all pratim that are nichlal in the mitzvah of Vasili Mirish, of building the bayis. What's the Indian? This is a bayis and these are the kelim, right? And you could even have a scenario where you have hakrava, because you don't have the kelim. So it's like bayit l'chud and kelim l'chud. Right? And then he goes on to explain his unique shita that there's a special mitzvah saseh on the aron and the kaporas, right? Which we're not going to get into right now. That's just the next sugya he goes into. Right? We want to go on the ikar machlokas, that he's having with the Rambam. Right? That the Rambam made the asiyas hakelim, all pratim of the mitzvahs aseh of vasuli mikdash shachanti b'soicham. Actually, vasuli mikdash to be accurate, is what the Rambam said. Oh, nichon vasuli mikdash, right? And the Ramban disagrees with that and says, wait a minute, that's the house l'chud and the kelim l'chud, ubifrat, that you could have a scenario that you're makrav in the bias, even if you don't have the kelim, right? So he says, we should make the asiyas hakelim, pratim of the mitzvahs that are performed with them. Right? Mitzvahs aseh adlakas neros. You can't do it without a menorah. So every the asiyas of menorah is nichlal on that mitzvah, because you can't do that mitzvah without a menorah. It's a hechsher of that mitzvah, and hakrava has to be on a mizbeach. So all the mitzvahs of hakrava, the mizbeach is nichlal in them as the hechsher of those mitzvahs. And v'hu adinami, every kli and kli l'tzorach tashmishay, l'tzorach the avodah that it facilitates. The Ramban's approach seemingly is more Svaradic, right? And I think the Rambam is the one that needs defending. Pashtus, what the Ramban says, bias l'chud and kelim l'chud, and it is very reasonable what the Ramban says. Make the din of making the kli a chelik of the mitzvah that's done with the kli. The mitzvah say it's done with the kli, right? And it's really the Rambam that needs yishuv, right? But the truth is, we could have to be mamik more. There's a very yesodistic machlaikas that's going on between the Rambam and the Ramban. Right. We find the Gemara says, mikdash ikri mishkan, mishkan ikri mikdash. It's called both. It's called a mishkan and it's called a mikdash. And think about what these terms mean. Right? I think mishkan, v'shachanti b'socham, the term is a lot more clear. Right? The term is a lot more clear. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu dwells with us. There's Gilui Shechina there. It's a place that the Shechina will be with us, or we'll see how the Shechina is with us in that place. And he dwells amongst Klal Yisrael. It's a makom of Ashras Shechina. Mikdash it's a holy place. It's already a avod of Kachim. Right? We do the avod of Kachim. We do the Hakrava. The term Mikdash most definitely is Naita Tadin of Avodah, all the Kachim that we do there. The Avodah is called Kachim, right? All the Hakravas that we do, and it has to be B'makom Kadosh, right? Right, so it's a Makom, Mikdash is noted for the Tadin of Avodah, right? And the term Mishkan is Naita Tadin of Ashras Hashchina, and of course, Baruch Shem, we have both. And that's why Mikdash Ikri Mishkan, Mishkan Ikri Mikdash. Right? But we could still ask a chakira like this, right? Which one is the etzem and which one is the accompanying? Which one it would be its essence, and which one would be like the din that hooks on to that essence. To say it like this: is it the pshat that's a makom of Ashras Hashchina, right? But that's where you do the avodah. So it's better the Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaBchira is a makom of Shechina, and the avoda has to be done there. Or we could say fakert. It's a makom of avoda. This is where we do the avoda, and the Shechina dwells where you do avoda. So it's betzim a mikdash, and the Shechina dwells there, or it's betzim a mishkan. It's betzim a place of Hashras Hashchina, but that's where you do the avoda. So is it a makom of Hashras Hashchina, and the Torah said do the avoda in a makom of Hashras Hashchina, or is it a makom of avoda, and the Shechina goes and dwells where we do avoda? Right? Listen to the Lashon Ramban in this Pirush ala Torah, in Parshas Truma, right? Right, after giving a whole preamble that we got mitzvahs, already by Mamad Ar Sinai, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu made with us a bris, right? Excuse the background noise, please. Right. So they crossing my bris al zeh v'matayim lo la'am v'ulam le'elokim. From now this point, they are for him a nation, and he is for them, their Lord. V'kasher na'imayim mitchila v'atem shamot tishmu b'kol shvates brisi v'isem li segula v'amar v'atem tu machas kohen garosh. You're going to be my treasure, and you're going to be a holy nation, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. He named Kedoshim Rim Shebayim Mikdash Lashros Shchinas Obenim. Now we're holy. After Matan Torah and the Bris, we are holy, and it's befitting to have the Shechina amongst them. L'chein tziva tchila al dvar ha-mishkan shelo bayis b'toicham mekudashol. You should have a house amongst them, sanctified for his name. V'sham yedaber and Moshe Taras Bnei Yisrael. Right, it's mekudash l'shmo, right? It's a makom of, that hashras shem shamayim. V'chol makom asher azkir hashmi avodecha berachticha. Right? And why? That's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu meets with them. Right? V'ikar chefetz b'mishkan hu makom menuchas hashchina shoran, and that's the ikar chefetz of the Mishkan, which is that the Shechina should dwell there, and that's why, and that's the special inyan of the Aron. Speaking very nice with the Ramban Shita, the Aron is also a mitzvah, right? But the ikar of the Mishkan is a makom hashchina, and that's the function of the Aron. K'moshav v'nora ad tilcham v'dibartcham me'al hakaparos. Al kein ikdim Aron v'hakaparos bekan ki zeh muktam b'mala. V'samach la'aron ha'shulchan v'amenor shem kelim kamo v'roe inyan ha'mishkan shebavuram nasa. So this is the secret, right? That the first thing mentioned Parshas Truma, is the asiyas ha'aron, because that's the ikar, right? Sof ma'aser machshava tchila, like the tachlis is what ikar b'mayla and first in thought, right? The ikar is v'no'adati l'chasham. Mi ben she'ah kruvim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu meets with us and dwells with us there, and the Aron is the ikar thing that's keneged, the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu dwells amongst us. And then Agav, since we mentioned the Aron, we mentioned the other kelim also, because they're sachakol, they're kelim also, so it's doime el adoime. But the ikar vort in the bias is the Aron. The Aron is the kli that's most keneged, what the bias is all about. That's a makom v'hashras hashchina. Right. 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 And Avo Moshe Dima Parshat Vayakel as a Mishkan Esol Vesvetzel Cheros himself he showed the Kadim B'Maisa. Now, of course, that which in Parshas Vayakel, right? In Parshas Vayakel, it talks first about making the Urios, making the walls, making the tent, and only after that the Kalim. That's because that's what's befitting in Maisa. As Betzalo asked Moshe Rabbeinu, Kalim Shani Oiseh Chanachnisein. So that's the secret of the duality of Parshas Truma versus Parshas Vayakel. And which Truma is what Moshe Rabbeinu initially told Betzalo. First he said Aron, Kalim, and Bias, right? And then Betzalo understands that that's not practical. So mitzvah practicality, it has to be Bias, Aron and Kalim, which is the way it is in Seder Vayakel. So it says Moshe Rabbeinu in Parshas Truma is explaining it lefi the philosophical idea. And the Ikar idea first. The Ikar idea is Hashras Hashchina, and the Aron is most connected to the idea of Hashras Hashchina, and that's the Ikar. The Ramban said it here, black and white. The Ikar of the Mikdash is a Makam of Shechina. Right? And the Aron is most connected to that Bechina, and this stems very well. Why the Aron is also its own mitzvah, lefi the Ramban. Right, it's also an ikar, in the tachlis of creating hashras hashchina. But echshelo yeh, the bais is a makam of hashras hashchina, and the aron is a kli. It's not a kli avoda. It's not, but it's a kli that's most connected what the bais is about. And then the kli avoda were mentioned next to the aron agav because zeh kli v'zeh kli. That's lashon Ramban, and he goes on. Hama'ayin ya'ayin. It's the first Ramban in the parsha. How he goes on to solidify this idea that there was hashras hashchina on Har Sinai. Right, and Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted the Hashras Shechina to be institutionalized. Right, and so the Hashras Shechina was on the Har now is institutionalized with the Mishkan. Hagam they calls it a Mikdash, but the ikar of it is that it's a Mishkan. Right, that where the Kvei Hashem that was on the mountain is now Mofia there, and he goes to darshan similarities between the halachas of the Hakbala and the halachas of Meira Mikdash Ayin Sham. So Nimtzenu Lemedim from the words of the Ramban. Right, that the word is that the bias is a makam of Shechina, and that's where you do the avodah. Right, what's the lashon Rambam that we quoted in all the different places? Right, the lashon Rambam, whether it's the Sefer Mitzvah, start with again, Sefer Avodah, Hilchos Beis Bechira, Paragal House, Mitzvah Asos Bais LaHashem Muchan Lios Makrivim Bo HaKorbanos. It's a place to do the carbon. The Chol of Shos Payim Bashan, that's where you congregate. Alil Regel 3 times a year. Shenem of Vasuli Mikdash. Right? Same thing. In Mitzvah Chaf. Right? Hu Shetzivanu, Livnos Petzchia, Lavoda, Bo Yakrava, Vavars Eish Tamid, Veilav Tia, Alicha Valil Regel, Kibbutz B'chol Shor, Romisal Vasuli Mikdash. Right? Mamish, that it's a makam of Avodah. Of course, part of the Avodah is Aliyah L'Regel. Not a word here about Hashras Hashchina. It happens to be true that there's Hashras Hashchina there. It's true that happens. But the Mahus of the bias is a bias of Avodah. One of the inyanim of the Avodah is also Aliyah L'Regel. Right? But that's, it's a Makam of Hakrava, Makam of Avodah. Right? That's Vasuli Mikdash. The Bchinas Mikdash is Ikar. Right? That it's a Makam of Hakrava. Right? Nor, right, in that Makam Akrava, Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Shechina is Mofia. So it comes like this, that this Chakir that we asked, right, is it a Makam HaShechina and that's where you do the Avodah, or it's a Makam Avodah and that's where the Shechina is a Machlekes, the Rambam and the Ramban. And now it's Kamin Chaimer, we understand where the Rambam's coming from. It's a bias of Avodah. So now you can understand very, very well why his svara that he wants to make the Asiyas HaKelim protim in the bias, and even if the Ramban is correct that we could be makriv without Kelim in emergency purposes, let's say Lamer Zogan, right? But Afal Pikein, the Inyan of the bias is a makam of avodah. So it comes out that the Kelim and the bias is all the same concept. It's all this idea of avodah. So it's not bias l'chud and kelim l'chud, because the bias is a makam of avodah, and the kelim are klei avodah, right? So it could all be nichlal in the same mitzvah saseh of vasuli mikdash, right? Mach a makam avodah, right? But according to the Ramban, it's a makam of shechina, right? So it's their geschmack, like the Ramban, why he most definitely will not make the kelim a chelik of the mitzvah of the bias. He won't. He won't, because the bias is a makam of shechina. The kelim are klei avodah. They were mentioned besmichas to the Aron because zekli v'zekli, that's his lashon. But the Aron is its own bria, and that's why he gives it its own mitzvah saseh, because it's also connected ashras hashchina. But he's very clear that the bias is a makam of ashras hashchina. So bias l'chud and kelim l'chud. The kelim are klei avoda, and the bias is a makom of shechina. So to him, it's much more mistaber. Not mistaber. It can only be that the asiyas hakli should be a chelik of the mitzvah of the avodah that's done with the kli, but not to him. It's not mistaber klal that it should be nichlal in the mitzvah of making the bias, because the bias is makom of shechina. There's a kli of avoda. So the kli of the avodah is nichlal in the mitzvah say of the avodah that's done with that kli. But like the Rambam, it's very clear. Right? The Rambam, it's a makom of avodah. So the klei avodah are nichlal in the mitzvah of making the bias. V'zeh mavur kamin chaymer. Right? But there's still another nekuda. B'meh dvarim amurim. That the Rambam says that the mikdash is a makom of avodah. Right? And that's where the shechina is. That was talking about the mikdash before it reached Har HaMoriah. Right? And the Rambam says this mefurish in the Mar Nevuchim. Right? The Rambam wrote it, really. The Rambam wrote it, so I think it's mutter to quote from it and bring a raya from it. In Chelik Shlishi, Perek Mem Hey, Ayin Shom, right? The Rambam makes it very clear, Har HaMoriah was always meant to be the makom of the Beis HaMikdash. Already from the time of Avraham Avinu, and he brings his rayas that Moshe Rabbeinu knew it. He knew it. He knew that Avraham Avinu, and already in the Zman of Har Hashem Yeroah, it was already the makom of the Shechina was Har HaMoriah. That was always designated to be the makom HaShechina. Right? Right, so the getter from Makom HaShechina is Har HaMoriah. That's the Shechina. That's a special getter of Har HaMoriah, and that's why the Rambam explains in that same parak in the Mar Nevuchim, right? That Avraham Avinu in the days of Avraham Avinu was already Niskadesh to be the Makom of the Shechina, and Moshe Rabbeinu knew it. And the reason why it's always said B'loshem Stami in the Torah, Makom HaShivcha Hashem, Makom HaShivcha Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to hide the details from the klal. The man in the street shouldn't know exactly where it is, right? Because then there'll be a machlokas between the shvatim. Because the people that will get a nachla, get a nachla near Yerushalayim will be jealous of those that did it. So the Torah kept it a secret from the Hamon Am, but it was always meant to be that way. That the Makom HaShechina is Har HaMoriah, right? The Har HaBayis. So if so, there's an unbelievable, the Rambam is kamin chaymer, in what he says, and also in the way he breaks up the psukim, right? That what he says, when he's talking about the din of making a Beis HaMikdash, right? And he says, Vasuli Mikdash, and that's where he stops, he stops the pasuk there. Not v'shachanti b'socham, because it's not the ikar shechina, it's not the mokum of the shechina, right? So of course the din of making a makom of hakrova, a makom of avoda, that tzivui already happened in the Midbar, when they made the Mishkan of Moshe. When he says that shosh mitzvahs nitztav b'kisosam la'aretz, he says a new din, even though there's the old, the din that was, kavua va'omed, of making a makom of hakrova, that went into effect already in the Midbar, right? But a new din now came into play, a new chiyuv, which is an anaf, of course, of the mitzvah of Binyan Beis Abchira, but it's an anaf that's special and germane to knisasam la'aretz, is to now make a makom for the Shechina, right? To make a makom for the Shechina. And that's why he says, the shichnoi, to go to the place of his dwelling. The shichnoi to seek the place of his dwelling, ubasa shama. That's the new din and the hevdela mahuti of the Beis Olamim, as opposed to the Mishkan that we had in the Midbar. That the Beis Olamim on Har HaMoriah is l'shichnos. That's a makom of the Shechina, right? And that's the makom of the Shechina, and that new din to make a makom for the Shechina is a new halacha that went into effect. I mean, everything's misinai, but the halacha went into effect. Beknisasam la'aretz. L'shechno seek the dwelling place of his Shechina. Right, the Bechina of Shechina, they dwells amongst us. That's a special din of the Beis Olamim. That's on Har HaMoriah. Right, so there's no stira. Right, the din of a Beis Hakrava, a makom of kachim, that's already mitzvah v'emei from Vasili Mikdash. Aber nicht b'shachanti b'socham. Meaning to say like this, right? Like the Rambam, it's so good, the drush of Chazal, right? Of course the Shechina was there at the time, but it was Iker there, B'schus Knesset Yisrael. Because the Shechina, Gol Yisrael, the Shechina's Mofia and Knesset Yisrael, right? But it wasn't a makom of the Shechina. It was a mikdash, but it wasn't a mishkan in the sense of like the base olamim was, right? It was v'shachanti b'socham. Yeah, the Shechina was there, but b'schus klal Yisrael, not because the mishkan is the makom of the designated makom of Shechina. It's not the Shechina's real home. It was there b'schus Knesset Yisrael. It was v'shachanti b'socham, right? But the Beis Olamim on Har Abayis and Har Moriah is l'shichnoi sidrashu. That's mamish. Yeah, he dwells there. That's his home. That's mamish's bias. That's where he dwells. That's mamish the Shechina's home. The Shechina dwells in Knesset Yisrael, even Begolus, because the Gol Yisrael goes Shechina Imayim, but the Shechina's home is Har Moriah. The Shechina's home wasn't the Mishkan in the Midbar. It was V'shachanti B'socham. It was Nizgal there, but Bikr B'schus, that the Shechina's with Klal Yisrael wherever they go. Right? Gol Yisrael goes to Shechina Imayim, so it was Nizgal there, but B'schus Knesset Yisrael. Right, but Har Abayis is the Makom HaShechina, and that's why it's Kodesh Adei Yom Hazeh, even though Lachar Churban, whereas any place that the Mishkan once was, but Pashtus you're allowed to go, just like you're allowed to go on Har Sinai, even though there was the biggest Gilul Kus there that ever was in history and ever will be. But it wasn't the home of that Gilui Shechina. It's not called the home of the Gilui Shechina, and that's why once the Gilui is over, Bimshocha Yovahim Yalu Bahar, and Hua did Nami to any place that the Mishkan ever was, but on Har Moriah, Har Abayis, over there it's B'Kedushaso L'Ad L'Olom E'Olam, because that's mamish the bias of the Shechina. Okay. And we'll just end off with a little word that, the place to bring this out is in Hilchos Malachim. Right? Because that's the function of a melech. A melech, Malchus Yisrael is really a gili of Malchus Shamayim, which is the midah of Shechina, and that's why these three mitzvahs go together. Melech is the gili of Shechina b'tachtonim. The melech represents Malchus Shamayim. Right? And the one who's Omed Neged Malchus Shamayim is Amalek, Ein Kisei Shel Hashem Sholem, Ve'ein Shmo Sholem Achi Machaz Zar Shamok, as we read in the parsha we just read, Yad Al Kes Ka, the Kisei, the Malchus Shamayim, and the Shem Shamayim, that both are beside the midah of Malchus, which is the Indian of the Beis HaMikdash. That's Makom Asher Azkir Eshmi, and it's also the Makom of, it's not just, else that Shem Shamayim is Kayadua, the midah of Malchus, right? But it's more than that Gamrinon, Ein Yeshiva Ba'azora El Malchi Beisod Bavad, the fact that the Melech is allowed to sit there shows that it's also called his Makom. That's why Yeravam was anti the Beis HaMikdash. They'll say he's not a real Melech, because he can't sit in the Azora. Rechavim will be sitting, he'll be standing, right? Because, the Melech, he's a Merkava, he's a part of the midah of Malchus Shamayim, and that's what the Makom HaMikdash is, and that's why these you need to be Meina Melech, Memana Melech, be Machaz Zarzok, and only then you build the Beis HaMikdash. And the Mashmos is not a mikra, that even though it's a mitzvah on the cloud, but the Melech, David HaMelech, was Nisoirer to build the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rambam Paskins lost his level. Mashiach will build the Beis HaMikdash, because the Beis HaMikdash is the Bechina of Malchus, the Gilui of the kingdom of heaven on earth, and that is Hashras Hashchina Bimkomo Sheyeh Bimhera B'Yameinu.